in this recording, I'm going to go through the fourth syllabus outcome from the preliminary HSC design, syllabus for design and technology. This syllabus outcome, P3.1, talks about investigating and experimenting with techniques in creative and collaborative approaches in designing and producing. There are 2 dot points. Creative approaches, including cognitive organizers, strategies for problem solving and idea generation, and collaborative approaches to design teams and communication between and within teams, team responsibilities. We have students will learn about and learn to. Students will learn to select and apply a variety of cognitive organizers, apply problem solving techniques to identify problems, identify factors that contribute to the successful work and collaboration, and collaborate and work cooperatively. Okay, so I've based the headings on the Weasley textbook. Just finished the Harry Potter books. There's within this chapter, so it's chapter 4 of the textbook, we have selecting and applying cognitive organizers, which ironically doesn't talk about cognitive organizers, applying problem-solving techniques, advantages of cooperative structures, and I've combined these 2 factors that contribute to successful work and collaboration and working cooperatively. Okay, so if we take it to the top, I have here that designers should be creative and understand innovation and entrepreneurial activity. Creative means that you can generate ideas and develop those ideas. Innovation is creating new products or developing further, expanding on existing products. And entrepreneurial activity, I would define as, there are various definitions, but I would define as taking financial risk for the pursuit of profit. Now, in this subject, it's sometimes a little, the textbook does have a definition. If I, there we go, entrepreneurial activity. Alain de Botton from the School of Life has a explanation on how to be an entrepreneur, which talks about, which in his case is talking more about identification of the need, and the need being needs that aren't being met by the broader public. But we will focus on the design process. Okay, so as a separate video, I will make a new video called Wellbeing 4A or something like that. Chapter 4A, which talks about well-being contributing to creativity. There's a lot of evidence that says that well-being, and this includes things like getting enough sleep, exercise, taking time, taking up part of your day to actually just sit and think, to allow yourself to have opportunities for thoughts to come through where you're not listening to a podcast or doing some other activity. These things can contribute to well-being, and well-being contributes to creativity. But that's something for another time. Selecting and applying cognitive organizers in the chapter, it talks about things that define a good designer and activities that designers should do. So good designers must be able to think critically. So thinking critically is the reason why I think this is actually the most important HSC subject. Despite the fact that me coming from an engineering background and really enjoying teaching engineering studies, I can see that this subject, I think, teaches the skills that are the most relevant and the most useful for most people. This is because the main one of this is thinking critically, learning to apply a set of tools that every interaction you come to evaluate and reflect on the various inputs that we have around us, to the decisions we make, and also to the reason others make decisions, can help us to approach our life in a more considered way, to be less frustrated with the systems that are in place, or where we are frustrated, to seek out ways to introduce changes and be successful as entrepreneurs. I think that these skills actually apply pretty well to everybody, but we teach them in the format of design because designers change the world. That change the world around them, and that can be effective no matter what field you're in. I guess this is a concept of design encompasses many fields. Okay, so in addition to that, we must be clear about our goals. I would say that the first step of the design process is analyzing or creating a design brief, understanding the situation, and coming up with a set of goals. In any task, I think it's always very important to come up with goals. We need to be well informed about related issues. So the example I tend to use is tennis. If I'm going to make tennis equipment, I probably need to know something about tennis. I need to know about the culture of the tennis. I need to know that when you play tennis, you hit rubber balls. The size of those rubber balls. If I didn't know those pieces of information, if I thought instead you hit basketballs or cannonballs, I'm going to design a very different kind of product, and I'm going to end up not making a product that's going to be successful because it's not going to meet the needs of that community. The more things that you're aware of, especially the things that are related to the field that you're working in, the more likely you are to be successful. So despite an engineering background, I'd say the thing that I probably know most about now, the thing I'm most passionate about, is board games. I play a lot of board games, own a lot of board games. I also follow the board game industry. I have a pretty good understanding of how the board game industry works. This means that if I was ever to design a board game, I'm probably going to be more likely to be successful than other people. We need to consult a range of resources. This means we constantly need to be thinking from things from different points of view. We need to be seeking out different perspectives all the time. The more perspectives we see, the more likely we are to have a better understanding of the situation to come up with the best solutions. Furthermore, we need to consider a variety of points of view, not only those we favor. The best feedback we get is usually the constructive feedback, the feedback that says, look, this is not what you're not doing well. It might be hurtful to hear, but the fact is that it's usually from our failures that we grow rather than from our successes. It also benefits us to see things from other people's points of view, to see things not just from our own. It's a good idea to see things from your competitor's point of view. Not just those we favor. The more that we can see things from other people's point of view, the more likely we are to identify needs, the more likely we are to see the faults in our projects. That it can be very hard when you're so close to a project to see the things that you could be doing better. And seeking out and learning to be able to see things from a different point of view is how you can end up keep iterating a project again and again until you get the best possible product. But it can be very hard to see faults in your own work. Okay, we work to our best of ability, as you would imagine that most professionals would. Continue to reflect on actions and decisions, and we share ideas with other people. Now, in this subject, you will be required to produce folios. Folios are there to demonstrate your learning. The idea is that a lot of people who do this subject are not going to be experienced entrepreneurs. Rather, the majority of people who do this subject are going to be taking their first steps in the world of design. In doing so, there's a lot of evidence that says that reflection upon any work is probably beneficial. So this is true for teachers, this is true for doctors, this is true for carpenters or plumbers. The more that if you go back and say, what did I do well today, what could I have improved on, you're more likely to identify things that need improving, and that by reflecting you're more likely to have a successful outcome in the future, or more successful outcome in the future. Also, you're going to need to be able to share your ideas. Your folio is a way of sharing all of the ideas that you've had over the course of your project. In addition to communicating your ideas and sharing through the folio, the more people that you speak to, the more different viewpoints you're going to have, the more likely you are to come up with different perspectives. And we've already talked about the benefit of seeing things from a range of points of view. Okay, designers should be motivated, disciplined thinkers who conceptualize, analyze, synthesize, and applies information. Now, there's a lot of words there. Motivated means that you're willing to work hard even when it's difficult. Disciplined means that motivated means you have energy. Disciplined means you're willing to do it even when it's difficult. People who conceptualize, that means they come up with the initial idea. Analyze means to understand that idea. Synthesize means to build upon that idea and bring together connections. And apply information means take that stuff that we've learned, take the things that we've found out, and actually go up and do it. They should, and take on board the things that we've learned rather than just doing something, but doing instead the thing that is based on evidence, based on our research. Engineers should question traditional solutions. Now, perhaps as a separate video, I will tell my Polish pork pot story, but the simple idea can come down to the idea that often the solutions that we have are based on tradition or based on situations that are no longer relevant. And it's very important that we can identify which situations are no longer relevant, which solutions are based on cultural values rather than on necessity. And we can then question whether or not that cultural value is beneficial. So questioning traditional solutions can be a way to identify where we can break out and where we can have a new solution. Evaluate information. So we need to take information from a range of sources. I will, so possibly I will create a new video on the polished pork pot story and a video on what is an acceptable source of information. This is also, it comes down to assessing sources and resources. The idea is that we need to be able to use sources of information that are accurate and that are credible. I might use as my gold standard anything that comes from a .edu and therefore .edu.au website, or the UK equivalent, which is .ac.uk. That those are usually pretty good because they've come from a university, or things that come from a .gov or equivalent. So I think it's .go.uk if it's in the UK. The other countries like France, they don't use that at all. Everything ends in .fr. So it can be a bit tougher. So there are sometimes that a national body might still use a .com address. So or an industry standards body might use a .com address, but we should be very wary of those informations. I generally also say anything published in a book is usually pretty good because at least one publisher has had to say that yes, they endorse that information, they're putting their reputation on the line. By comparison, literally anyone can pay $10 to create a web page that spouts any information that they would care to do so. Like I said, I might create another additional video on that one. Okay. So we need to accept abstract ideas. That's a bit of an abstract idea. It's probably worthy of its own video. The idea that abstract is something that doesn't clearly or easily reflect reality. So an abstract idea might be that when we interpret information that might not necessarily be apparent at face value, where we need to interpret data or some other way of being able to identify a trend. And if we have evidence that points to us in that way, even if it's not something that necessarily resonates with us as being self-evident, we sometimes need to accept things based on the evidence rather than based on what we have in front of us. So a concept for things might be an abstract. This isn't a great example, but I'll use it. An example we could use is something like acupuncture, which might be very well accepted in a traditional community. And then a scientific community might say, look, there's no good reason for that to work. However, there might be things like the placebo effect, or the nocebo effect for that matter, that mean that it actually does see a positive impact, and therefore might still be worth maintaining even when we can't see the direct effect. That's good enough for us to use in this case. It's not something I'm likely to test you on. Okay, if I go into more detail, I'll do so in a separate video. We need to test ideas and develop conclusions. And that means that if I'm thinking about, well, I'd like to use this material for my product, and then we need to be able to justify that in some way. So we could justify that based on the past experience of other people we trust, or based on some sort of reliable, credible source. But instead, we might just say that we're not sure which method or which tool we're going to use, so we're going to test a few of them and stick with one of them. I think that developing conclusions and taking conclusions is really important. That it's very easy to get into what we call analysis paralysis, where we keep looking at ideas and saying, well, maybe this one, maybe that one. But ultimately, we need to make decisions in order to be successful. We need to be able to move on with our lives. The idea is if I was coming up with a marketing campaign, the first step is I need a logo, because I'm going to start putting out logo on lots of things. There's a certain point where we say, well, this logo has certain advantages, this other logo has other advantages. There's a certain point where you need to just make a call, and you need to say, I've made a decision, I've thought about it, and move on. Trust your gut. But as long as you've used a system to justify it. Okay, we need to justify our solutions. In this subject, you're going to need to document every decision you've made and justify why you've done it. You need to be open-minded and listen to others. I tell people once you've come up with your project, that you should speak to everyone you meet about it. If you feel chatty enough that you want to talk to people on the bus, tell them about your idea, because the chances of them stealing your idea is almost zero. Whereas on the other hand, the more people we speak to, the more different points of view we get, and the more different points of view, the more likely you are to identify potential problems or potential solutions that would be superior to the one you're currently using. Communicate effectively. In your folio, you're going to need to write down a lot of information. You have to be able to communicate that in the most efficient way possible. Now, this is a subjective thing as what is effective communication, but I would say that things that use a little time and carry your information succinctly is probably a effective method of communication. But really, any method of communication is the one where the message that the person who's listening has heard, or the person who you're communicating to has heard, is the same as the meaning that you intended to say. Now, ironically, I appreciate that what I've just said there was probably not very clear. So, an example of communicating effectively is when someone speaks, that the message that the person hears is close to the message that you intended to say. That's what I'm going to go with as a good example of communicating effectively. We need to reflect on our learning. Earlier I've said already that reflecting on learning is usually a very good predictor of future success, and you will have to reflect on your learning in your folios. Applying problem-solving techniques to identify problems. It is not enough to have ideas. You must develop those ideas in order for your design to be the best solution your design to be the best possible solution. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so the fact is that there's a lot of research that says that younger people are often more likely to generate ideas than older people. But I find that even by the time we get to year 11, or actually, to be honest, even by the time we get to year 7, we find that a lot of people are already starting to shut down their own ideas. This is why when we talk about brainstorming later, we're going to talk about the benefit of brainstorming and the idea that there is no bad idea. Just put ideas on a piece of paper. But it's not enough just to have the idea. Once you do have your idea, you need to keep pushing. You need to keep coming up with more ideas, because it's very easy to stop when the first idea is presented. Often techniques that cause you to force you to have to keep working, to keep pushing your idea, mean that you end up getting better solutions. You must develop your ideas so that you can get the best possible solution. You have to keep pushing. You have to keep reiterating your project. You have to keep looking at things from other people's perspective. Keep looking for where is the weakest part of your idea in order to get the best possible solution. Okay, so we have a definition here, which is lateral thinking is the process of using creative or unexpected thinking to solve problems. So Alain de Botton, that we talked about earlier, he has his colored hats where he uses different, but the idea of mentally adopting a colored hat helps us to see things from different points of view. It's not something I'll necessarily talk about here, but it's something that you can find pretty easily, that the different hats give people different perspectives. There are some other cognitive organizers, which are strategies to help to develop and generate ideas. Now, I'm going to focus on 3 that I'm really going to speak about today, and that is because I think that some of them are very similar. So PMI and PINE are the same thing. Again, if you go to the textbook, I'll just direct you to the page where these are discussed. So PMI, brainstorming, futures wheel. Where's mind maps? Concept board and mind map. Okay, so mind map is 2 words. Okay. I won't go into these in too much detail. I'll get people to. I would rather that you go and look at those specifically. But what I'll do is I'll talk about the PMI, which I like to use, rather than PMI, I like to use PINE. Now, the reason for that is PMI stands for plus, minus, and interesting. I prefer the acronym PINE or PMIC. The idea that plus, minus, interesting, you need also a conclusion. When we do evaluation as part of the HSC keywords is to make judgments considering arguments for and against. So we need to have a judgment at the end. We need to have a conclusion saying whether or not this thing is good or bad. So PINE does the same thing. It considers positive, interesting, negative, and evaluation. I'm going to use one example, and the fact is that in this subject we will end up doing some hundreds of examples, but just one example that I think is a reasonable one is a MacBook. So when I consider a MacBook, I could say that the positives are that MacBooks are very reliable, that both their hardware and their software tends not to fail nearly as fast, and that I find that my MacBooks last a lot longer than my Windows laptops. So that's a positive. My interesting is that they have a different software system. They use Unix rather than Windows, or they're a Unix-based system, which is Mac OS. That different system has benefits and disadvantages, but it maybe it's a matter of personal taste, but there is it's definitely an interesting difference. Another thing you could talk about is, say, for instance, the light that is the illuminated apple that is on the back of the MacBooks. For some people, they'd consider that a good thing. Some people think it's a bad thing, and they feel the need to put a sticker over the top of it. It's something that is neither good nor bad. It's a matter of perspective. A negative factor is that MacBooks are more expensive, and that a lot of software still doesn't run natively on a Mac. For me, there is software that I would definitely like to use that I can't use because it doesn't run on a Mac. Finally, in an evaluation, I would still, the next laptop I buy will probably still be a MacBook because of that reliability, because I know what I'm getting, I know that it's going to work, and things that, so as a result, my overall conclusion, my final evaluation is that yes, I like MacBooks and I'm going to continue to buy them. They might not be for everyone, but they are for me. Okay, so brainstorming and mind maps, I'm going to say are very similar. And they're a way of generating ideas. The idea is that when you have brainstorming, there's no wrong ideas in brainstorming, because one idea might trigger another idea. I like to use the term socks and socker. So the very simple version of this story is that if I'm thinking about different ideas and I'm trying to think about what I might do, and I might go through a list of clothing and not really have any intention of making my project be about clothing, and then I write down the word socks just because I'm going on that trend. What's another thing? I'm just trying to follow that link. And I think socks, and that gets me thinking about soccer, which is association football, the round ball. That might be the solution that I'm looking for. That might be the thing. And if it wasn't for the coincidental fact that socks sound like soccer, I might not have ever come up with that idea, or I might not have come up with that idea after I'd already hit production. So that's where the idea of there's no wrong answers in brainstorming, that you want to try and shut down the critical brain, which I think is the black hat in the Alain de Botton hats. You want to try and just enhance your creativity. You want to get people feeling comfortable throwing out different ideas and trying to get past that critical thinking part of your brain. Future reels consider the positive or negative impacts of a technology. And mind maps are similar to brainstorming, but they have more structure. So where you develop it off into tangents. So you might group your ideas as you're working. You might try and group them in say, functional criteria, aesthetic criteria, and other limitations or requirements that, for instance, cost or time. And then from there, we can branch out. And so there's a logical link in the structures. Again, the Wesley book has more details. Page 38. Or page 26 to 38. Sorry, 36 to 38. Okay. A concept board is often used by people in the fashion industry or interior design, and this is where we put up small samples of inspiration. So we might have things like material swatches or color palettes or photos of things that inspire us. They might be things related to the product, even tangentially. So we might decide that we're going to design a item of clothing or an interior space based on something like The Wizard of Oz, in which case we might have a gingham swatch based on the common depiction of Dorothy's outfit. We might have red sequins. We might have the color yellow because of the yellow brick road, or green for the Emerald City. These might get, the idea is that as we pass these things day after day, it helps us to sit in our mind, and it creates an opportunity for us to have an aha moment where we say, oh, this is what I should do. Okay, so the advantages of cooperative structures. This is where we're thinking about why we want to do group work. So the reason why we want to do group work, so in high school and university, you will know you'll have to do group work in this subject, and you'll have to do group work most likely at university. The reason for that is because almost everyone has to work in a group work environment at some point, and that often employers will ask people about their group work experiences. We want to have employees who are able to work with others. What we want to consider are that there's a variety of reasons why we want to work with other people. The main reason I would say is increased production. A company like Microsoft simply could not work with only 4 employees. It's too big to be able to have all that work be done by one person. So we just need more people to do more stuff. You can't build an Eiffel Tower on your own. Whereas there are other reasons why it's beneficial to work in groups. The first one is more perspectives. By having more perspectives, what we're saying is that different people live different experiences. People who are from South America, women will have different experiences from men, and they'll have different attitudes towards things. You might decide to name your product something, and then a person who's from South America or a woman might say, you really shouldn't call it that. I don't think you've considered it, and that women or people from South America are going to find that name really offensive, or they're going to find that to be really silly, and it's not going to make for a successful product. That's a very simple idea, but the idea is that when we design structures, we need to design structures that are going to suit a variety of people, so we need to take into account their needs. We might consider that if you build a building like that, that's going to be offensive to some people. That's not going to suit certain different types of people. That if we talk to, for example, if you have a room full of people who have all gone to very expensive high schools and then gone into university and never worked in a low-paid job, they might design buildings that don't consider the needs of, say, the janitorial staff or the service industries that supply those buildings, because that's not an experience that they are familiar with. The more people that we have working together, the more different perspectives we have. Okay, so we also get diverse or specialized skills. When we have big teams, we end up having people who can specialize. We can, if we're building a website, we might have someone who's very good at the HTML side of it, that they're really good coders. Whereas we might have other people who are very good at graphic design. So that bringing those people together, we're going to harness the skills and end up producing not necessarily twice as much, but we might produce a thing that is going to give us very good design and very good software base. The more people we have, the better we are at problem solving. So it goes back to my earlier idea of talking to everybody, because the more people we have, the more different perspectives, the more likely we are to identify problems and come up with solutions. We've already talked about increased production, and we have organizational or social economy of scale. The idea that simply the more people we have, the easier it is to accommodate more people. So social economy of scale means that in a bigger community, you're more likely to find people who are like you. You're going to be more likely to find the kinds of people you need in a society. Whereas when you have a smaller group or a smaller team, you just have to take what's available. Organizational economy of scale is more about, say, a set of skills. So where I might need one accountant for every 10 employees, if I have a company of 10 employees, I might need one accountant. Whereas when I have a company of 50 employees, I might be able to get away with just 3 accountants, which means that I have a saving proportionally of 2 employees. So that's an example of economy of scale. The idea that generally the bigger the company is, the more that they can cut down on those specialty needs. So that's an advantage in working in groups. Okay, factors that contribute to successful work and collaboration. I combined that because it's such a small section, and I put it into working collaboratively. Collaboration is an essential skill in most workplaces. I already mentioned this, that most employees will expect you to be able to work together with other people. By definition, if you're being employed by someone, you're going to have to work with at least one other person, but very rarely you're going to work in a 2-man operation. And that you're going to have to work with people that you don't necessarily have authority over, or they don't have authority over you, and that you might not necessarily like, which leads me to Casually Explained. Casually Explained has a video on group projects, where he talks, I think, about university experience and he uses that in the frame of Tuckman's stages of group development, which is forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. I think it's a worthwhile video, and I think it will definitely prepare you for university level group projects. When faced with problems to solve, it is best to plan a series of steps that will lead to a solution. Successful teams will go through these steps. They will have so this is down below. We'll have questions that will talk about what are the characteristics of successful teams. These will include things like they clearly set defined goals. I've talked before about how goal setting should be the first step of any design, and that without goals, we don't know what we're working towards. You need commitment from all team members. This means that if you have people in your team who don't agree to those goals, you either need to use management tools to do something about that team member to help them come to an agreement, or you need to change the goals to meet that person. So you also need to agree on long-term and short-term goals. You need to have a direction to head. You need to have a cardinal point. So we're going north, but you also need to have an idea of where we're going to be in 3 years, and we need to know about where we're going to be in 3 weeks. We need to employ communication strategies. So a lot of the time we have meetings, and when we have meetings, we have a format that allows the meeting to operate smoothly, so that we don't end up spending a lot of wasted time, and so that we can get to conclusions quickly. Everyone feels they have an opportunity to speak. There's good arguments to say that groups of 3 members work effectively, and I have found that when I was in a group experience with a group of 9 people, I found it very frustrating because I felt as though I never had an opportunity to share my perspective. But comparatively, if you have a team of three groups of 3 where one person communicates your ideas, that can be more effective. If it's a team that works, each of those three mini teams still work together well. In larger teams, good strategies and good systems in place can still work. So at the moment, I work in a team of 10 people in my faculty, or more than 10 people. And because we have good leadership, we have good systems, I know that if I have an issue that's important to me, I can put that on an agenda, and then I could raise it at the end of the meeting as general business. You need teams of skilled members. We've talked about the website analogy. We need people who have a variety of skills. And if we don't have people who have a variety of skills, we have people who are willing to change, which I'm jumping a couple of points, in order to develop those skills. We need to have a team that possesses a relevant knowledge base. So in the case, I am a team of technology teachers. We have a variety of skills. We have some people who teach food tech and hospitality. We have some people who teach timber and metal. We have some people who teach graphics and engineering. They're very different skills. Now we have people who are willing to change to meet timetable needs. And we have people who are willing to teach others. We have people who are willing to point out that these are things that you could be doing better. All of those are important to develop the best team you can. Being open to change is very important. The same way we talked about that feedback is important, and that we learn we grow more from our failures than our successes. It's important that you take those opportunities and make the most of those opportunities. People need to use their authority ethically and fairly. So my team has a leader, and it's important that leader is seen to be someone who acts fairly and ethically. So this means that they don't delegate all the work to one gender, or they don't delegate more work unfairly to younger people than older people, or it's important that it's seen that they don't use their power to get out of doing work that they should be doing. Also, in the broader context, it's important that members of the team, my staff, aren't seen as abusing their power in other contexts, say with students or outside of the school, or that they're not misusing resources or other ways of acting unethically. Okay. Group management generally can be considered under 5 steps, which is we consider skills, we assign roles, we plan tasks, which I'll explain about more, we document, and we evaluate. I've mentioned documenting earlier, so in the case of meetings, it's important to document your the purpose of the meetings. It's important that meetings are documented. So that way you have a record of what people have agreed to and what was discussed, so that way if someone's missed the meeting, they have a record, or more importantly, if there's a dispute down the road, you have a record that you can fall back on. When we're planning our tasks, it's important to identify subtasks. There's a phrase, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And the idea is that no matter how impossible the task might seem, if we break it down into small steps, we will be eventually able to get there. We need to identify resources. I have a whole lesson on resources coming up, so I won't go too much detail here, but I will just say that resources can include people, they include tools, and they include things like materials, and they include things like information or services. More on that in future. We have to estimate durations, milestones, and sequences. So durations is how long the project should take. Milestones are points in between that time. So if I say that the project's going to take me 3 weeks to complete, my boss might say, okay, well, I want to see that you've done half of it by Thursday. Or I want to see that you've made a good start. I want to see your plan by Thursday. And that might be a milestone. I want to see half of it by next week. The sequence is that sometimes certain activities should best be done in a certain order, and by agreeing that beforehand, you don't have someone going off and doing something which is going to it will have to be redone by someone else. We need to allocate responsibilities. Now, the term we use in meetings is actions, so that we say that we have these 3 things that are actions for Jimmy, and that he's going to do those by this date. So actions are specific tasks that need to be done in a specific way. It's important that these are clearly defined, because you don't want to have someone show up and say, oh, well, you didn't say that you need the whole thing done. I just thought I had to get it started by Thursday. So it's clear that everyone has an understanding, that everyone has the same understanding of what is expected. We need to confirm those agreements, and in addition to meeting minutes, another important tool these days in business is email. So I've definitely had former bosses call me up 6 months or a year after the fact and called me up and asked, actually more than a year after the fact, and called me up and asked me if I could find an email so that to prove that we had confirmed an agreement, which would have cost one party or the other $20,000. Because I was able to find that email, I was able to ensure that our company had done the right thing, and we weren't the people liable for that $20,000, and that we could say no, in fact, it was the other company who's acted inappropriately, and that we have communicated that clearly. Okay, I'm going to very quickly go over the questions, the activities for this task, and I might add something just onto here as well. Okay. Define entrepreneurial activity. So I've given a definition at the top, but you might want to come up with your own, seeking out your own sources and your own, taking feedback from other perspectives, and come up with your own definition of entrepreneurial activity. As a matter of fact, I urge you to do that. We have identified 5 characteristics of the good designer, which is listed up the top. I won't try and scroll too much because that will get slow and boring fast. But we say designers must be able to do these things. So that would be somewhere there is probably where you want to get those answers. Describe the 3 ways you could use a design folio to demonstrate creative processes. Your design folio will have to demonstrate that demonstrating creativity is a marking requirement for your folios. How are you going to do that? Well, you're probably going to use techniques like brainstorming or futures wheels, or mind maps, or create concept boards. Provide a PMI of 3 subjects for high school study. Now, I'd suggest that you've recently chosen subjects for high school study. I'd say pick 3. Perhaps pick 1 subject that you are glad you chose, 1 subject that was on your reserve list, and 1 subject that you definitely didn't want to do. Do a pine saying the things that you liked about that subject, things you didn't like about that subject, things that are neither here nor there or a matter of opinion, so things that are interesting, and then give a final conclusion as to what your decision was. And something that was interesting might be, say, for instance, the school resources, which are neither here nor there, or the teacher, which might be some people might like and some people might not. Explain the purpose of a Pine evaluation. Pine evaluation is a tool that provides evidence of evaluation, but it also helps us to identify the positive and negative features of something. The idea of giving the overall evaluation is more a documentation aspect, but by going through our projects, by looking specifically for the positives and for the negatives, and even looking for the things that are interesting, they can help us to further develop our own projects. Brainstorm what to take camping. So I want you to imagine you're going camping. I want you to generate a list of 2 or 3 people, a list of things that you should take. But when brainstorming, remember that there's no wrong answers, and try and produce as many ideas as possible. Come up with as many things, and then once you've come up with those ideas, then simplify those ideas down to based on what would be suitable. Provide a futures wheel for the global adoption of synthetic meat. Originally I was going to have Meat 3 Mondays, which is why it's in italics. But synthetic meat, the reason I'm using synthetic meat is because it's my job to teach you about upcoming innovations or new technologies. So synthetic meat is a very new technology which has not yet been adopted by the wide market. And that is meat that is grown in a lab rather than coming from an animal. What would be the implications of that? What would happen if we did that? An alternative would be the adoption of Meat-Free Mondays. What would happen if all the OECD countries, the rich countries, the developed countries, what would happen if they stopped, instead of eating meat at least once every day, they had one meal a week where they stopped eating meat? What would be the impacts? Provide a mind map for the design of a money box. In this case, we want to think about, so if we wanted to make, say, a Year 8 project out of timber, we might want to consider what are the functional requirements, what are the aesthetic requirements, what are the limitations, for instance, the time and cost of the product. Organize a team. So in a group of 2 or 3 people, I want you to work on organizing a team for a orientation for junior high school students. So let's imagine Year 6 students coming into Year 7, and we want them to come to school and have a positive attitude towards the school. We want them to meet people, to learn names, to know where they need to have to go, and maybe have participate in some fun activities. So in a group of 2 or 3, I'd like you to come up with some ideas talking about how you're going to plan that team. So identify the goals, identify the skills that you'll need, the skills that who you can use to provide those skills, what sort of resources you might need. Explain the advantages of working collaboratively. Well, I think you'll find that I gave 5 reasons up above. I would be happy. So explain means it's a key word, a HSC keyword, which means using cause and effect. So you have to say why you would do something. What is the advantage of each of those things? Why these things are beneficial. Identify the 5 characteristics of successful teams. I think I pointed that out as we said it. 5 characteristics of successful teams would be any of those. And for the next question, I think it's the steps that you would take as group management. Those 5 steps seem like good steps. They're just identify, so writing down those 5 words would probably get you enough marks. Okay, in my next video, we'll go through the 5th outcome for the syllabus, and I will I'll probably go through some videos elaborating on this as additional stuff later.